From day one of the championships, 25-year-old Jacqueline Ellis had set the pace in the women's class. Ellis had won 4 of the 5 heats leading up to yesterday's races. A win in Heat 6 gave her an unassailable lead in the women's and her 6th overall title. There was only one blemish on the way, a 7th placing.
I was disappointed I had a 7th place at one stage. I didn't start very well that race, but luckily I'm able to drop that heat. So my places are pretty good overall.
Ellis says she expected tougher competition from Sydney's Heidi Gordon and England's Catherine Grime.
I expected a bit more competition from them, but when the bigger fleet, maybe they sort of got lost in that and sort of couldn't come through. So.
In the full rig class, a disappointing final heat for 3-times world champ Glenn Burke. Burke was leading the overall point score going into the last round, but finished well down the fleet. New Zealander Dean Barker claimed a 2nd placing, enough to give him the overall championship.
The Multicultural Access and Resource Service, or MARS, caters for people from more than 50 different nations in the Coffs Harbour area. Last year, with assistance from the Department of Immigration and Local Government and Ethnic Affairs, Anne Richens was employed to look at the problems people of non-English speaking backgrounds face on the North Coast. Today's launch of the Where to Go will provide information to people about social groups and community services in the Coffs Harbour area. To coincide with the launch, member for Coffs Harbour Andrew Fraser has announced a further $18,000 grant for the multicultural service.
It was a solemn start to the day, with drivers doing a slow lap in memory of Queensland driver Chris Antes, who was tragically killed during practice yesterday. But it didn't take long for the pace to pick up, the 18 starters powering their way around the tricky Newcastle circuit, backed by the unmistakable roar of the Formula One engine. As predicted, Sydney's Bob Halliday quickly held the upper hand. It was a race of attrition, with a number of boats dropping out. Hitting speeds of up to 200 kilometres an hour, Halliday maintained his lead and went on to take the checkered flag. And an unusual victory lap. It's the first time Halliday has won 3 in a row, and the series leader was lost for words.
I can't explain how it feels. I came to Newcastle really hoping just to finish.
The Water Skiing Classic was also a chance for Sydney's Paul Robertson to make it 3 in a row. But the winner of the past 2 Newcastle races failed to take the trifecta. In some outstanding racing, Shane Hudson behind Stringer took out the event, with Scott Kell behind Mirage second. In her first outing at the Motordrome, Oliver made her intentions clear. But it was a race destined for disaster. The American was involved in the first incident of the night. Barry Lee spun his Camaro, slamming into Don McEwen and Oliver. But there was more to come. Heading up the straight, Oliver tangled with Tom Wright and came off second best. Several more drivers dipped out as the race developed into a survival test, but it was Robert Carrick who finished on top. In the modifieds, Tony Hopping outclassed the opposition to win the final and the feature event. Hopping is now in the box seat to win next week's state championships.
Kuwarra may look like just another Hunter Valley property, but it's actually a treasure trove of Australia's winemaking history. Among the red cedar panels and rough-hewn stone walls of this house in the Gresford Hills are the memories of 150 years of the Lindeman family and its efforts to make us smile through the fruits of the vine.
It's never gone outside the family. It's been for, what am I, the fourth generation. Tim will be the fifth generation. And it's been the family all the time.
Family members have come together at Kuwarra to toast the memory of Dr. Henry Lindeman and his dreams of wine.
He's a very game man, Dr. Lindeman, when you consider that 150 years ago there was no way in the world they had the opportunity that exists in the wine industry today.
The Lindemans eventually moved their operations to Benin at Pecolbin, and with them went a daily treat for the vineyard workers plucked from the Gresford area.
One of the big features was they got a bottle of wine a day as a ration, and that was one of the big family bonuses, I think, that ever went to any big property.
So you had a perpetually happy workforce, I guess?
Oh, happy as lark.
Lindemans may now be in the hands of wine giant Penfolds, but Kuwarra and its rich history remain a family affair. Fifth generation Tim and Helen Capp have been restoring the house's tradition to take the Lindemans' name into the future. Scott Bevan, NBN News.
Just over 3 years ago, Beaumont Street was decimated by the Newcastle earthquake. Rebuilt, today it forms an integral part of the city's cosmopolitan lifestyle. In a stark contrast to this, just down the road in the same street, an age-old craft is still being practiced.
I just left school and I just went on from there, and my father taught me most of what I know.
It's in this way the old world craft has been passed down through 3 generations of the Hazel family, ensuring the continuation of a discipline that dates back more than 2,000 years, when blacksmiths first discovered how to convert iron into steel. Trevor has worked in the Beaumont Street shop for 42 years. When his father bought the business in 1949, he says things were very different.
Blacksmith shops those days were similar to a service station. Where you take a car to a service station now, they used to bring their horses along to get shod, their carts to be repaired.
Making cattle brands was also a major concentration. The markings on the shop wall a reminder of how Trevor's father used to demonstrate the finished product to customers. Offering a further trip down memory lane, Industrial Revolution belt-driven technology used to power machinery like drills and this hammer, hand-built by Trevor's father. Nowadays, Trevor mainly repairs and sharpens tools for local tradesmen and industries like tube makers. The difference between himself and commercial blacksmiths, the old world techniques and handmade machinery he uses, including the 500 degrees Celsius heated forge used to soften the tools. It's a dirty, hot and labour-intensive job, so why does he do it?
I suppose when it all comes back to the point, for a living. That's that whole thing behind everything. But I've never really thought about doing anything else.
But now the 58-year-old widower has to. A wrist injury put him out of action for 5 months last year. This severely depleted Trevor's finances. He can't afford to employ an apprentice, plus Trevor's daughter, his only child, has taken on a different career. When Trevor departs, it'll signal the end of a traditional blacksmithing era.
Although the first day of school is a memorable one, it can also be a traumatic experience for 5-year-olds starting kindergarten. These new recruits will join nearly 49,500 primary school students walking through the region's school gates this week. At Barnsley Public, some mums lent a helping hand with enrolments as others looked forward to overcoming shyness and making new friendships. For some students, the move from primary to high school can be just as daunting. Mums and dads on hand lending support to new Year 7 students. The Education Department expects nearly 34,000 secondary students to return, unemployment coupled with disappointing HSC results contributing to the Hunter's highest recorded retention rate of students. School buses resumed familiar routes, friends rejoined, some not too keen on another year of study.
At school, nobody really wants to go back.
Meanwhile, Broadmeadow High has reopened as the region's only performing arts school. The subjects of music, dance and drama are being offered from kindergarten to Year 12. New additions will soon house primary students who will follow in the footsteps of their peers. According to head teacher Jenny Fleming, it's an exciting initiative, providing an opportunity for budding performers to polish up their acts in the classroom.
If children do like to perform and entertain in whatever sphere, whether it is dance in a dramatic form or singing, they can do it here.
We're looking at an art form that goes back 50,000 years. People have been on this continent for 50,000 years. Their artwork is still being created. There's nowhere else on earth where that is happening. So we've got this power and mystic that's coming through for those 50,000 years.
Art dealer Roy Ryan says the exhibit is a showpiece of some of the most respected Aboriginal artists in the country. Under the one roof at Garden City Shopping Centre, the artworks vary in price tags from $95,000 to $70,000. As well as more than 250 paintings, there are other unique works. These boomerangs, painted by Pro Hart and crafted by Bluey Robinson, are selling for $50,000. A second-hand early model refrigerator, a bargain at $250,000.
Aboriginals used to paint in two ways. One is a traditional creation sort of area, and the other is just all normal day-to-day happenings, like going out and digging up witchetty grubs.
The exhibit is on display until Friday. Melinda Smith, NBN News.
About 10,000 hectares, or more than half of the Barrington Tops, has been engulfed with Scotch broom. The weed was shipped out from Europe in the 1840s as a garden plant. It's now running out of control, dropping thousands of seeds per square metre of soil.
Without any control, the problem is going to get a lot bigger in this area.
It flowers in spring, a brilliant burst of yellow, and Scotch broom is so dominant it smothers all undergrowth, including native flowers like bluebells, orchids and daisies. Farmers fear it will spread to nearby grazing land. Today, after years of research, the Department of Agriculture released this tiny twig-mining moth, a natural predator of the weed.
It lays the egg hatches and then burrows straight into the stem of the broom,
and then it mines the inside of the plant out.
But this does not mean the end of Scotch broom. While the moth will thin out the problem, it's just the beginning of a biological control plan.
It's the first step, and then we'll be looking at a number of other insects, mites and diseases for control of broom.
2,000 of the twig mining moths were set to work. It's seen as a historic step. For decades, chemical controls have had only minimal effects, with million-dollar price tags. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
Only a quick horse's canter away from the village of Wollombi lies 5 hectares of land that everyone in this picturesque valley can call their own. The Wollombi Public Reserve was dedicated 100 years ago today. Back then, the claiming of the land for the people was cause for celebration. A century later, not much has changed. More than 80 school students, residents and Cessnock Mayor Marie Callaghan came together on the parcel of land that has become part of the Wollombi lifestyle.
And thinking on that sense of history, people would have come here, perhaps young girls lifted their skirts to play hopscotch and boys to bowl their first ball. That all happened here in Wollombi 100 years ago.
For the memories of those 100 years from now, Alderman Callaghan unveiled a plaque and trees were planted. But there was time for present pleasures, including a sausage sizzle on the turf that even the young treasure. Matilda, why is this ground here so special to you?
Because it's my home and also because it's 100 years old.
This piece of ground is the sole piece of ground that's available to both the Wollombi School and the Laguna School for sports carnivals, for any other function, for even large picnics, fundraisers. This is the only land that's owned commonly by the people in the valley.
Scott Bevan, NBN News.
Paul Hamilton is now at ease, comfortable in the thought his son Michael is back in custody after escaping from Silverwater Correctional Centre in Sydney.
I was wrestling with this issue over and over again, and I've had a lot of sleepless nights about it.
Paul, Michael's stepfather, spoke out this week on national television, calling on police to apprehend his son, fearing for a young girl he'd moved in with in Brisbane. In 1984, Michael was convicted of murdering 14-year-old Cardiff girl Lisa Parsons. A few months after being paroled, he was convicted of assaulting another woman. Yesterday, he gave himself up to police. His girlfriend, apparently grateful Paul Hamilton had given her some warning. She rang to thank him.
She had no idea he was a runaway criminal and a murderer.
But Michael's mother, Paul's first wife, has criticised Paul for giving up his son.
She said, well, you've just lost your family, complete family, over doing what you've done. And I said, well, time will tell.
Peter Ryan, NBN News.
Hendo reckons he's got what it takes to make it to the top of national and world championship competition. It's a long road, but he's stuck to it since he was a teenager. Now 21, Paul was the fastest qualifying New South Wales runner in a recent Queensland Grand Prix meet. Late last year, he was clocked as Australia's fastest man over 100 metres with a time of 10.44 seconds. Overcoming a hamstring injury and under the watchful eye of coach Max Debnam, Paul has been building up for a shot at the World Championships in Germany. But that means he'll have to put in good times at Perth, Adelaide and Melbourne over the next few months. Andrew Lobb, NBN News.
The rain didn't stop members of the CFMEU from blockading one of the main entrances to the base. Trucks carrying bricks to the building site were stopped as the members carried out another in a series of protests against builder Stewart Brothers.
Protesting against Stewart Brothers because none of the workers have been paid their money which they owed.
What also irritated the union was the presence of two inspectors from the state government's Building Industry Task Force. They claim the task force is trying to close the union down. With police mediating, the union agreed to move their vehicles from the road if the inspectors left. That was carried out and the blockade was shifted. The men say they'll continue protesting against Stewart Brothers until the issue is resolved. Next week they'll distribute several thousand letters to residents of Singleton calling for support. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
The meeting's objective was simple: to find out if the 50 miners had the will to fight on to try to save New Vale Colliery or accept Pacific Power's concerns that the lease proposal to operate the state mine was unviable. To fortify their spirits before the meeting, the miners distributed crocks of port commemorating the now famous New Vale sit-in 2 months ago.
Does it sweeten the sharp taste of maybe losing the mine itself?
No.
Pacific Power has rejected the miners' budgeted leasing cost of $500,000 annually and demanded $2 million a year. At the meeting, mining consultant Ron McCulloch told the men the proposal couldn't work if they had to pay the annual $2 million fee.
The commercial reality of the small coal mine is we don't generate sufficient funds to justify that sort of payment level.
Despite Mr McCulloch's bleak assessment, the miners' union told the gathering that the only chance of success was to stick to the original lease proposal and not to reshape it according to Pacific Power's demands.
Even if we did shandy the original proposition around to meet these current financial positions they're putting in front of us, that they would come up with a scenario that would again make it impossible to operate.
Some called for industrial action and more political support.
It's time that these pollies were mobilised. It's time they got off their backside.
But the men voted to continue the commercial line. Mr McCulloch will return to the negotiating table in the now slim hope that Pacific Power will approve the lease. Scott Bevan, NBN News. For months, the signs that a federal election was looming were obvious to those living in the Paterson electorate. Now that it's been decided Australians will go to the polls on March 13th, the ALP's Bob Horne, the Liberals' Bob Roberts, Independent Bernie Neville and the Nationals' Gary Watson are pressing the flesh in earnest. This is what the four candidates are clamouring for. The seat of Paterson is almost 10,000 square kilometres in area, with 72,000 people on the electoral roll, ranging from small rural communities in the north down to the holiday playground of Port Stephens. But the fact that really concerns the politicians is that this seat is considered the most marginal in the country. With as few as 200 votes separating the winner from the rest, the candidates say they're listening to the people, and the people are making it clear what their main concern is.
Unemployment.
Have you ever been unemployed?
No.
Do you think you understand how the unemployed would feel, 1 million Australians?
I think so.
Have you ever been unemployed?
Well, let me put it to you this way. I got out of teaching about 5 years ago and I went to work for the TAFE system. I worked with long-term unemployed people there and designed courses to get them into employment. I understand unemployment.
In other words, no. As the only independent, Bernie Neville says he represents the people and not a party, and he says he was once unemployed for 2 days. Liberal Bob Roberts was unavailable for an interview, but if he and the other candidates are wondering what the people are looking for, here's a few clues. Scott Bevan, NBN News.
Although not on the official campaign trail, Ros Kelly wasted no time making sure potential voters knew she was in town. Overseeing the government's arts, sport, environment and territories portfolio, the minister met with those who'd helped rescue Throsby Creek from being a polluted stormwater drain. Students from Ties Hill Public proudly displayed their native tree planting efforts. But the major purpose of Ros Kelly's visit was the inspection of Newcastle Galvanising Services, a company representing what the minister describes as the model of the future. Officially launching a cleaner production program, the initiative will help industries to change production processes, reduce pollution and improve efficiency.
But it's Cleaned Up As Act, and I think that's the way you have to work with industry, in a cooperative way first.
Cutting her visit short, the minister met briefly with a small group of protesters calling for a halt to wood chipping. They in turn made sure some stopped longer to hear their message. Organisers of the minister's visit say it was planned well before the announcement of next month's federal election. But despite this, Ros Kelly is expected to be the first of many senior politicians who'll visit the Hunter before voters go to the polls on March the 14th. Melinda Smith, NBN News.
It was an important day for Scone Shire residents, the commissioning of the Puan Bridge, which has taken 12 months to build and almost as long to have it officially commissioned. The 60-metre two-lane concrete bridge replaces a single wooden carriageway built 58 years ago, which failed to cope with the demands of today's traffic. The new bridge will provide a vital link for the transport of produce to regional and metropolitan markets. Costing almost $650,000, jointly funded by Scone Council and State Government, it's the last bridge to be funded under State Government's Bridge Subsidy Scheme. Some residents fear this may signal the end of road and bridge funding in rural areas.
The whole of the tax which is raised from the road will go to the road, and it will be distributed in favour of the country 60-40.
Adding a human touch to today's ceremony, 84-year-old Flo Newling, who was present at the opening of the first bridge built over Dartbrook in 1934.
If anybody was there was only there with a horse and sulky or a horse.
How do you feel today?
I feel very happy about it, being honoured.
Why?
Like, well, then, I mean, there's nobody else to keep up with me.
Merewether High was one of 2 Newcastle schools to benefit from the expert cricketing knowledge of Australian and New South Wales off-spinner Greg Matthews and state coach Steve Rickson. State wicketkeeper Phil Emery and spinner David Freedman were also on hand. The idea of the coaching sessions to engender enthusiasm through junior ranks and help promote country cricket.
I think it's important that you to get out and meet the masses. I can remember in my days guys like Dougie Walters, Bert Oldfield, who was like 80 years old, I think, when he did a cricket presentation at my junior club, and that was a big lift for me.
Out at Townsend Oval this afternoon, the tone was a little more serious, with Six Shield representatives making guest appearances in the Newcastle and Gosford teams, which lined up for a day-night game in the revived Country Cricket Challenge Cup. Local Newcastle players have the help of all-rounder Brad McNamara and batsman Michael Bevan. Joining the Gosford Wyong team is state wicketkeeper Phil Emery, batsman Steve Small, former Novocastrian Greg Matthews and David Freedman. Gosford Wyong won the toss and batted first. Andrew Sainsbury and Andrew Radcliffe opened the batting order, left-handed paceman Phil Bancroft launching Newcastle's attack. Despite it being a hard and flat pitch conducive to run-making, the visitors got off to a slow start. By the 7th over, they were none for 12. The 45-over match continues tonight, with Newcastle going into bat around 7 p.m.
This is Fame Cove, a peninsula popular with residents of Port Stephens. It's to be sold by the owners, Australian Paper Manufacturing. The federal government has offered to help buy the land if the state government puts in half the money. But Environment Minister Chris Hartcher is concerned about the ongoing cost he says the state would have to bear. The Friends of Fame Cove group says there are no ongoing costs. The land has survived for years without any money being spent on it. But the Environment Minister's office estimates the area would cost the state between $20,000 and $100,000 a year to maintain as a national park. The issue will be discussed by residents at a meeting tonight at Soldiers Point.